So tonight I'm here to state the fact that it is unfair to call Donald Trump a racist. My president is not a racist. A racist is somebody who advocates for hanging people of the opposite of, a racist is somebody who let's say a white person who advocates for black people to be hung from trees, or a Palestinian who doesn't want to live next to a Jew, or a Nazi who wants to eradicate all the Jews from the planet Earth. Now, I don't know how the term Nazi has gotten teamed up with Donald Trump, besides maybe a few stagnant supporters, but describing Donald Trump as a racist is clearly out of line, unnecessary, provocative, overstepping boundaries, crosses I can't tell you how many lines, and is essentially, it's an uneducated comment. I'm going to pass it on to you.
All right, so first I just want to address that idea of your definition of racist, which I think is really uncharitable. So Google defines a racist as a person who shows or feels discrimination or prejudice against a group of people or other races who believes that the particular race is superior to another, right? And this is really important because for a few reasons. One, it doesn't have to be anything extreme, right? And two, which I'm going to get into in a second, it doesn't have to be explicit. It can also be implicit. But I also want to define for the pretenses of this debate that fair, when we're deciding if it's unfair to do it, we should just refer to the preponderance of evidence that we have and make a reasonable assumption based off that. So my first main argument is that everybody is a little bit racist. Like I said, being racist doesn't have to be explicit. We don't have to be sitting in our basements, literally wearing our grand wizard robes, plotting the downfall of minorities to be a racist. In fact, for many Americans, this idea of implicit bias is real. Like, according to the BBC, patterns of implicit bias are very rampant throughout the population, and we know that they exist because when you introduce sensitivity training to try to combat them, you see profits rise across the board because more qualified people are getting the positions they deserve, right? The BBC goes on to explain this implicit bias may be one of the driving forces behind the election of Donald Trump, explaining that people share his subconscious racism and thus associate with him. In fact, Malcolm Gladwell writes that 80% of people of the 18 million who have ever completed the implicit association test, which is a test that tests for implicit racism, were recorded as having pro-white biases. Note that this is a necessary argument for him to win, and if he doesn't get past it, it's impossible for him to win, because if everybody's a little bit racist, then so is Donald Trump. So my second argument focuses mainly around the things that Donald Trump has said. So he's reportedly said to close friends that laziness is a quality of blacks. He also has falsely claimed that a young black man has some kind of advantage in the job market today, ignoring systematic problems that these people of color face. If that isn't enough to convince you, he has claimed to have a good standing relationship with the entirety of the black community, claiming I have a great relationship with the blacks, a pretty racist idea if you ask me. Moving on from black people, he's also claimed he has some sort of good-natured relationship between himself and Mexican people. He's claimed that someone wouldn't be fit to be a judge because his parents were Mexicans. And how could we forget the best of them all, him claiming that people coming into our country from Mexico were rapists and murderers. And what's worse is that he tries to justify statements like this with a I have black friends type argument, and saying that he has thousands of Mexicans that work for him, so he can't be racist. And lastly, I'll touch on the types of policies that Trump supports that disproportionately affect black people or people of color. He supported new stop and frisk policies in New York, which were widely deemed racist. He supports mandatory minimums for people facing deportation from the country who haven't committed any crimes. He unironically implied that President Obama wasn't a citizen without proof. He attacks black NFL players and their right to protest on the field, calling them sons of bitches. Let's also forget him pardoning Joe Arpaio, who was discriminating against Latinos.
Well, I'm from Arizona. I can tell you one thing right now, okay? I could drive tomorrow morning. I'll put on Facebook Live. I'll drive to Home Depot, okay? And there will be a bunch of undocumented immigrants sitting at Home Depot, and you say, the police are coming, the police are coming. They're going to run. You want to know why? Because it's illegal. You want to know why it's illegal? Because the property owners of the United States of America are the taxpayers, okay? And those people aren't paying taxes. Okay, so by definition, it's not racist to say that somebody cross that imaginary border, that imaginary line, okay, and excuse me, sushi coming up. It's not a racist statement to say that somebody should obey the law and stay on the other side of the line, okay, because that's where they belong. They don't belong over here. And if they did belong over here, it would be legal, but it's not. The law of the land states that they are illegal aliens or undocumented immigrants or whatever the definition is, whatever the word of the day is or the word of the month. You know what? This whole idea of racist is out of line. It's out of touch with reality. I joke around all day and say, you're a racist. You're just a racist. You know what? By definition, okay, racism is subjective as hell. It's stupid. Okay, it is stupid. To say that somebody is actually a racist. Prove it to me. You know what? Somebody who's a racist, like a real Nazi, a real white supremacist that will not sit at the same table with a black man or a Mexican. Okay, that is a racist. Quit labeling my president a racist. He ain't a racist. It is subjective. Grow up. Grow a brain. This is what's wrong with society. You guys have all turned into snowflakes. This is pathetic. And I can't believe that society has actually turned to this and we're having this debate. It is ridiculous. I think it is stupid, okay? And to say that Donald Trump is a racist is immature. Okay, I don't need to go open the dictionary and look for definitions, okay, and bust out the source to be able to tell you that your outlook on life, okay, you know what, if you want to wear a little tutu, okay, and dance around like a fairy, then do it, okay, but quit trying to subject me to have to listen to that, and now we're actually having a discussion about this. He ain't a fucking racist.
All right, so there's two main arguments, all right? The first argument he makes is that there is no real definition of racism, right? So you have to go with the most extreme, right? He says it's subjective as hell. And he says, you know, somebody who won't sit at a table with a black person, that's a racist. So I guess so anything after the civil rights, you know, people who would literally ban black people from, you know, restaurants, racism ended in the civil rights era because people won't openly admit that they don't want to sit at a table with a black person. People don't openly admit they're a Nazi anymore. Like, no, and this just simply isn't true. The definition of racism isn't subjective. There's a very clear-cut definition that if you hold prejudices against somebody, that's racist. So then the other argument he brings up is, I don't even know what it was really responding to, but he brings up that if he drives to Home Depot right now and goes and finds all the illegals sitting outside, that if he screams for the cops, they'll all run because what they're doing is illegal. I don't know what that responds to, but I'm going to assume it responded to something that I said about Trump's comments about Latinos. So, one, Trump pardoned somebody who was convicted of being racist Latinos by the courts. That's Joe Arpaio. He pardoned him, and that's what he was for. This is a fact. This is a simple fact. Associating people who are Mexican with rapists and murderers falls clearly under the definition of racist. This is a fact. If somebody feels or has a prejudice, right, just because these people illegally entered the country, and I don't doubt that that probably happens to people standing outside of Home Depot, associating them with a rapist and a murderer is racist because you're doing it based on their race. That's not a hard concept. And I don't know why me pointing that out makes me a snowflake dancing around in a tutu, all right? Lastly, going on to the thing he said, the last thing I said about Latinos, right, is that Trump said that somebody wasn't fit to be a judge because his parents were Mexican, when there's no legal precedent of somebody even being able to pardon themselves from a case, right, because of their ancestry. So it doesn't even make sense for them to be able to do this, right? There's no reason for Trump to be able to do this, right? All he's doing is pointing out someone's race and saying they're not fit. And that doesn't even begin to touch on my first argument that I brought up, that everybody has implicit biases, right? Prefer my evidence that I read you definitions and sources over his calling everybody a snowflake who he disagrees with. And second, all the arguments that I bring up about African-American people, right? Saying I have a great relationship with the blacks and a young black man has an obvious advantage in the workforce today. And saying, you know, supporting things like stop and frisk and mandatory minimums and, you know, going against people who kneel on the football fields who are protesting, you know, police brutality against black people. These are things that disproportionately affect black people, right? Like I said, you don't literally have to be sitting in your grand wizard clothes to be a racist. Supporting things that disproportionately affect these people makes you have at least an implicit bias, right? And that's enough to be a racist for sure, because you're still having those prejudices against these people.
First of all, when you're talking about the judge, okay, the judge was openly La Raza, okay? So your argument just dunzo out the gate, okay? La Raza, the judge was open La Raza, okay? I don't think, it's La Raza collectively, okay, as a collective group, okay, if you want to get down by definition, La Raza is a pro-Mexican nationalist, pro-Mexican American nationalist organization. It is not. It's not. Of course. Why would he want to have a judge when there's already a bias? See, you already think he's a racist. So why the hell would you want to have a judge that actually thinks you're a racist hear your case? Of course not. And when to call Sheriff Joe, okay, a racist, it's pathetic. What Sheriff Joe Arpaio did in Arizona was he enforced the law. Okay, that the voters. So if you're saying that Arpaio is a racist, then you're saying Arizona voters are racist because voters voted that in. Okay, and guess what? Guess what? He enforced the law. So him enforcing the law makes him a racist? No, I don't think so. Joe Arpaio, all that situation was a witch hunt. And I know I'm from here in Arizona. I'm from Maricopa County. I voted for Joe Arpaio this past election. I voted for him the last election. And I worked on his campaign. I hung signs on his campaign. I can tell you right now, okay, Joe Arpaio ain't a racist. It's a go-to. It's easy. His jails he made very uncomfortable. At one point in time, in order to have electricity in your tents, somebody had to be pedaling a bicycle. Like he made the sandwiches, the bologna sandwiches, disgusting. They were like purple. But I can tell you one thing. I've actually gone to his jail before, and his jails make you actually want to not go back. And he did a great job of that. So thank you, Sheriff Joe, for having such a unwelcoming, unpleasant, uncomfortable, unfriendly, ugly experience in your jail, because it made me never want to go back there. And I definitely learned after that experience. To Trump being a racist, yeah, I think this debate is completely unnecessary because it is subjective. Can you honestly look me in the eye and confidently say Donald Trump's a racist? It's just like that's the argument I make when I'm making fun of people. Like it's like you're a racist. Oh, you're racist. You're racist.
All right, so if this is what it takes to convince you, I'm honestly willing to look you right in the camera and say, Donald Trump is a racist. All right, let's go to the arguments that he made in his last speech. First, he talking about the judge and how you wouldn't have wanted the judge anyway because the judge was in La Raza. The judge was in La Raza, which is a pro-Mexican nationalist group. This 100% proves that he doesn't know what he's talking about. So there are thousands of groups in Mexico called La Raza. These groups date back decades. There are women's rights organizations called La Raza. There are Mexican nationalist organizations called La Raza. The group that this judge was in was a group that gave scholarships to American children of Latino heritage. That is the La Raza that he was in. All right? I don't know why Trump would be so opposed to this. But it just goes to show that he has no idea what he's talking about, and he's throwing these buzzwords out there to try to, like, I don't know, make you seem that everyone else is trying to out-to-get Trump, and it's all just so crazy to think that he could possibly have any prejudice. No, he doesn't know what he's talking about. That's what the group he was in. It was called La Raza. It was a group that gave scholarships to Latino American kids, and I can provide evidence for that after the debate, but I doubt he's going to read it. The second argument he makes is about Joe Arpaio and how, well, you know, Joe Arpaio's not a racist because I worked on his campaign, and because, you know, he ruled with an iron fist and in his jails, it made you not want to go back. And one, I didn't say anything about how he ran his jail, so I don't know why he's bringing it up. Two, I don't know how you working on his campaign means you can know for certain he's a racist if I can't know for any certainty that anybody else isn't a racist. And three, what I was talking about is when he was convicted by the courts, when he broke the law, which he seems to hold in such high regard of Joe Arpaio, right? When he broke the law of targeting Latino families. I wonder what that could be. That could be a racist policy. It seems like almost like, now, I'm just going to go back to the definition of racist here that I keep reading, which is pretty clear cut, is that's a person who shows or feels discrimination or prejudice against a group of other races. So if you're discriminating unlawfully against Latinos, that seems like a pretty racist thing to do. And if it's convicted by the courts, which Joe Arpaio seems to hold in such high regard, that seems like a pretty clear-cut thing that you can kind of pin down, doesn't it? And then obviously President Trump pardoning someone who's been convicted of this kind of screams that Trump doesn't care if somebody does something that's pretty racist, which to me seems like Trump kind of has these biases as well. Let's not forget my first argument that everyone's a little bit racist, which he hasn't responded to. And my second argument against all the things that I said about people of color and African Americans, which also no one responded to. So it's a pretty clear vote at this point.
Not even, I didn't even prepare for this debate. I looked at the topic the first time and I'm like, oh, okay. Racist. You need give me some steak with that, like give me a nice juicy cut of racism, because your definition of racism is so subjective. Oh, well, he let go of Joe Arpaio, who's enforcing the law and blah, blah, blah. You know what? But what I meant by his jails, okay, about him and his jails being so tough is that people have said in the are a way that describes how his outlook on the Mexican American community. It's a completely outrageous statement. It makes absolutely no sense. It's something that you see on the news here in Arizona. It is just, it's dumb. I don't know why people have this stigma that Joe Arpaio is a racist. Perfect example. Are you ready for this? Are you ready? Okay, I am Cuban. My grandfather came from Cuba. Him and Joe Arpaio are like this. They are tight. They are cool. Okay, when you Google my last name, you can see my grandfather's position. He's the director of Governor's Office of Highway Safety in Arizona. Okay, he handles funds for law enforcement in Arizona for DUIs, so on and so forth, for highway patrol money that gets distributed. Okay, him and Joe Arpaio are personal friends. Okay, if Joe Arpaio was a racist, you would think that Joe Arpaio wouldn't like my grandfather, and they're actually really tight. They talk all the time. They're good fucking friends. Okay, I know this. I have run into Joe Arpaio downtown. Hey, I'm Alberto Gutierrez's grandson. How you doing? And Joe Arpaio, oh, I love your grandfather. Good to meet you, son. Nice to meet you, boy. And it's preposterous. It's propaganda that's put out by the fake news, by the media, for people like you who have a pea for a brain that actually believe this fucking bullshit. Okay, that our president's a racist and he supports the KKK and Steve Bannon's a KKK and dirt. Whatever, dude. I haven't even been listening to your arguments because you're just parroting what I'm saying. And what I'm saying is that your whole outlook is screwed up. That's what's wrong with this country. We got a country full of snowflakes. You got a country full of a bunch of chickens, dude. A bunch of little chicken shits. You can call President Trump a chicken hawk, whatever, all you want. I don't agree with him in Afghanistan, okay? If you want to say he's a dumbass, I'll agree with you there. President Trump is a dumbass, okay? For saying that he wasn't going to go to Afghanistan, but he did. But for you to call him a racist just makes you look like a moron, okay? And quit doing that. Quit doing that. Because then you got to make it look like I'm arguing with a moron.
Normally they say that the argumentative strategy of just, calling everybody you argue with a moron, calling everybody you argue with dumb and uninformed, that's something that snowflakes do. So I'm kind of confused as to why I'm getting called a snowflake and then simultaneously just having all my arguments to be dismissed by referring to me as a moron. But, I'm going to let it slide and I'm just going to get to the meat of the arguments that were presented because it's what the debate should be about. And I think the people watching just expect a little bit better than that. So the main argument that he's standing up on right now, he's completely conceded everything Trump's either supported or said about African-American people, right? which he just writes off as that's crazy, which I think deserves a better explanation than that. He completely writes off the entire argument that everybody has implicit biases, right? And he completely writes off the argument that, you know, my definition of racism isn't subjective at all. It's very clear cut that if you hold some sort of prejudice or bias, that makes you a racist. 80% of Americans who take the implicit aptitude test, I believe it's called, come up with some sort of these biases. So it's very real and it happens to a lot of people. But just because, you know, I'm an idiot, I guess I probably won't understand it anyway. So the last argument that he's propping himself upon is this general argument about how his grandfather knows Joe Arpaio, and his grandfather's Cuban, therefore Joe Arpaio can't be a racist. And I'm laughing because this is almost word for word the I have black friends, I'm not a racist argument, which I made fun of earlier in my first speech, of which President Trump almost made the exact same argument of, you know, I have a great relationship with the blacks, or I have blacks who work for me, so how I cannot possibly be racist. It doesn't make any sense, right? You can still hold an implicit bias and have somebody as your friend, which I know he's going to say, you know, that's so dumb. He'd hate my grandfather, right? Being a racist doesn't mean, right, that like I said, you're not sitting in your grand wizard robes in your basement actively plotting the downfall. You're not actively sitting in your basement thinking that every person you meet who's of a certain skin color, you know, is an evil person, right? But you do falsely attribute, you know, prejudices to those people. And that's what President Trump does. That's what Joe Arpaio did, who President Trump clearly stood up for and pardoned, right? That's what President Trump does when he, you know, supports policies that allow people to do this more easily, like stop and frisk, and perpetuate systems that, you know, uphold policies like this, like mandatory minimums and the war on drugs, and, you know, obviously not, you know, persecuting police officers for unarmed killing of innocent black men and saying that that's, you know, there's just more, you know, violence on both sides or whatever. Like, these policies obviously are completely ignoring an entire swath of research and literature that points to a very clear problem, that there is racism in the United States, and failing to address that, and in fact saying that it doesn't exist at all, perpetuates that problem. And it shows that you have those implicit biases too, one, so you don't recognize it, or two, you are actively working against it. So either way, you do have at least a little bit of racism in you if you cannot identify what these biases are.
Well, sir, I am completely over this debate with you, because to me, it's a bunch of my feelings and a bunch of unnecessary leftist propaganda that brings out this argument that Trump's a racist, and, you know, this is racist and that's racist, and, you know, and you know, I don't know if you've heard about the student at Cal who wrote in his own gender as Your Highness. So now, if a professor at the university addresses him as anything other than Your Highness, or Your Majesty, excuse me, Your Majesty, he can sue the university. And that's the day and age that we live in. And that's the kind of society that we're over here promoting when we're talking like what you're doing. You know, give me clear-cut, hard, stone-cold evidence that Trump's a racist. You know, if Trump said, you know, black people aren't allowed to buy grape soda, okay, or grape juice, or they're not allowed to go buy watermelons, okay, they can't go to KFC anymore, Popeyes, they can't have any chicken, you know, or, you know, if you were to start proposing laws like that, then maybe yes, okay. If you're proposing that, you know, it was a law that you had to bring a pig to a mosque, you know, like, then we could call him a racist. If he said, you know, if he promoted, you know, going to your next door neighbor and, you know, finding your nearest black person and hanging them from a tree, then we can call him a racist. You know, that's almost, your argument is about as it's so far off to that other side that it makes it like it's just, those arguments are very similar, you know? So no, I think racism is dead. It has been dead. And I think if a business owner wants to refuse service to somebody, they should be able to. That's not racist. That's choice. That's somebody's business. That's an individual choice. And for Trump to, I mean, I'm watching where you're going with your arguments, and I get where you're going. You're using the whole you're running with the whole, media propaganda shit. And it's just, common sense doesn't let that happen. Reality, I live in the real world, therefore I don't believe that shit. So I don't recognize it. I really don't. So I just laugh at it. I really do. And the whole the Arpaio arguments, I know he's not a fucking racist. Joe Arpaio is not a racist. God.
And I mean, I like to live in the real world too, where we have video evidence of Trump saying these things. And I guess it's media propaganda when they put out things that Trump actually said, and he has to, actually be accountable to his words. I know that's a really high standard for people living in the real world, but there is video evidence that I know you just don't want to look at of Trump saying that somebody isn't fit to be a judge because his parents were Mexican and because apparently he's in an organization that gives scholarships to Latino American kids. I guess that's pretty good reason. Not really at all. Trump saying, if you really want cold cut evidence like you asked for, Trump, you say, well, Trump saying, black people, they're not allowed to buy whatever, black people shouldn't be allowed to do this. Trump calling Mexican people rapists and murderers, I'm pretty sure that's straddling the line, and I know you're just going to say it's media propaganda because you live in the real world and you just don't buy anything that goes against your narrative, but there's video evidence of him saying this, and I think that's a pretty racially charged statement to make. Somebody who is convicted by the law that he so upheld of, targeting Latino families, which we have evidence of, seems a little bit racist to me, but I know that's, I know it's not real world enough for you that we can actually look these things up in government websites and, be able to fact check them ourselves. But I know that your feeling that he's not should probably outweigh that. So I don't know. It's a pretty compelling, because we really like to go into anecdotes here because your grandfather knows Joe Arpaio and that can prove he's not a racist. To your statement that racism is dead, I'd like to give my own personal anecdote. So I go to the University of Michigan, and last week, Black students received death threats. People wrote the N-word on their door and they received death threats simply for being Black and existing in a university. And if you say racism is dead, I don't know if your definition of racism goes that far in the real world. I know in my snowflake world, calling somebody an N-word and then issuing a death threat to them counts as racism to me. And hopefully it does for anybody watching this who has common sense. But yeah, I don't really think racism is dead. I think stating that it's dead just perpetuates more blatant racism, like the stuff that gets experienced even in, college campuses, which are some of the most, hopefully open-minded places in the United States. And if things like that can happen here, I'd, love to see what they can be in places where they don't even acknowledge like things like this happen because it's just, liberal propaganda or whatever. But when there's evidence that I can link you and videos you can watch of Trump saying these things, I don't know how you can possibly sit there and do the mental gymnastics to convince yourself that these things aren't real. And it's just really sad to me that somebody could be sitting so far in this hole of despair that they could literally be shown a video of Trump saying these things and just saying that's liberal propaganda. So I don't know, man. I think my argument's pretty clear.
God damn stupid. You know what? It's so funny that you are so ignorant that you're actually still saying that he said that Mexicans, that he was talking about Mexicans are rapists and murderers. You stupid son of a bitch. Did you not listen? Were you not paying attention to that speech? Obviously not, because he wasn't talking about Mexicans. He was talking about MS-13, you dumb motherfucker, okay? And MS-13 doesn't even come from Mexico. It comes from Central America, okay? So if you want to get technical, let's get technical, okay? Next. You know what? No, let's stay with this MS-13 shit, okay? You're sitting over here saying that he's calling Mexicans rapists and murderers. What do you think MS-13 does? Okay, they rape people. They fucking murder people. They deal drugs. And when drug dealers don't get their money, people get raped. People get murdered. Houses get shot up. Crazy shit happens. They destroy neighborhoods. They completely overrun low-income Hispanic communities. Okay, and yes, there are communities that are full of Hispanics, and you can call that racist, call that whatever, but just because it's a fact that 70% of the neighborhood is of Hispanic descent or is black, whatever. I have lots of black friends too. Am I a racist because I say I have a lot of black friends? Am I a sexist because I say I have a lot of gay friends? Am I a racist, a gay racist? Like, Come on, man. Your arguments are dead. You've got 3 seconds. You didn't even coordinate your arguments right. Come on, man. MS-13, not Mexicans. So that whole argument is dead on your behalf. You clearly never listened to Trump talk. Why don't you listen to him speak? Listen to his speeches. Come on, dude.